Her body was burned beyond any possibility of identification. No one could tell who she was or what had brought her to that desolate roadside. As one investigator would later reflect, a young woman like her was always a target. Her beauty made her vulnerable, and the world is full of predators who hide behind ordinary faces. She was found without a nose, without ears, without fingers or toes. The wounds were not merely disturbing, they were calculated. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase every trace of who she had been. Stonington, Connecticut, is the kind of place where people feel safe. It is easy in a town like that to believe that violence belongs somewhere else, in cities, on screens, in other people's lives. Rolling hills, dense woodland, narrow winding roads that go dark after sunset. It is quiet, rural, the sort of New England community where outsiders rarely venture. It was here, on one of those unlit country roads, that a passing motorist spotted what appeared to be a fire burning in the brush. He pulled over, reached for his fire extinguisher, and was about to approach when a fire chief arrived on the scene. The chief began fighting the flames, but almost immediately recognized that what was burning was not debris. It was a person. Rather than spraying the extinguisher directly at the body, the chief angled it upward so the suppressant would descend more gently, smothering the fire while minimizing damage to whatever evidence remained. Connecticut State Police sealed off the road and began documenting every detail of the scene, the position of the body, what covered it, what surrounded it. The victim had been wrapped in layers of plastic sheeting, blankets, and duct tape. It was obvious to the officers at the scene that this was not where she had died. Someone had transported her here and disposed of her. This was a dump site. Dr. Ira Koer, a forensic pathologist with over 30 years of experience and more than 4,000 autopsies behind him, was assigned to examine the remains. He has always maintained that the work requires a particular kind of constitution and ability to face the worst of what human beings do to one another and still find purpose in the search for answers. The body arrived wrapped in a plastic bag. Removing the layers required extreme care. Every piece of material could carry fingerprints, DNA, fibers, anything that might lead investigators to the person responsible. Once the remains were exposed, Dr. Koer was able to determine that the victim was a young woman, likely in her mid-20s. She appeared to be a light-skinned black woman, though Latin heritage was also possible. What struck investigators immediately was the deliberate mutilation. The nose, ears, fingers, and toes had all been removed. A section of skin had been cut away from one ankle. The intent was clear. Whoever had done this was attempting to prevent identification. With no fingertips, no fingerprints, with no toes, no toe rings or tattoos, each removed feature was another barrier between the victim and justice. The burning pattern also told a story. The front of the body had suffered far more severe charring than the back, suggesting the victim had been placed face up when the fire was set. Pressed against the ground, the lower back had been partially shielded from the flames, and it was here that Dr. Koer noticed something significant. A section of skin had been cleanly excised. His conclusion: there had been a tattoo there, and someone had cut it out. Connecticut detectives searched their missing persons database for young women of similar description with tattoos on their lower backs. They found nothing. But when they widened their search to neighboring jurisdictions, a name surfaced 80 miles away on Long Island, New York. Rebecca Koster was 24 years old, a nursing assistant who lived at home with her parents. Her father had filed a missing persons report after her employer contacted him to say she had not shown up for her shift. She had gone out the previous night with friends and had not been seen since approximately 3:30 inches the morning. The missing persons flyer included photographs, physical measurements, and one notable detail: a large butterfly tattoo on her lower back. The similarities were impossible to ignore, but investigators remained cautious given the distance between Long Island and Connecticut. They turned to Dr. Koer to confirm or rule out a match. His approach was methodical. Dental records. Teeth are remarkably durable. Even when a body has been badly burned and deliberately mutilated, the teeth and the underlying bone structure of the jaw often survive intact. When Rebecca's dental records were obtained and compared against the remains, the match was definitive, as reliable as any fingerprint. The woman found burning on the Connecticut roadside was Rebecca Koster. Notifying a family that their loved one has been murdered is one of the most difficult tasks law enforcement faces. Rebecca's mother, Barbara, was at work when her husband called. When she arrived home and saw the detectives waiting, she knew before anyone spoke. They asked her to sit down and then told her that Becky had been found and that it was a homicide. Barbara ran out of the house and down the driveway, her screams cutting through the night air. Investigators began reconstructing Rebecca's final hours. By every account, she was a vibrant and warm-hearted young woman. She had followed her mother into healthcare, becoming a nursing assistant who worked with developmentally disabled adults. She was known at work for her patience and her genuine warmth toward those she cared for. Her colleagues admired her. Her family adored her. She was the kind of person who drew people in, easily social, energetic, curious about others. She loved going out, being around people, living with the easy confidence of someone who never imagined she could be in danger. Her mother had warned her, more than once, that beauty itself could be a risk, that it attracted attention, not all of it welcome. Becky had listened, but she had not really believed it. She trusted people. She trusted herself to read a situation. She was 24. On the night she disappeared, Rebecca had gone out with her closest friend, Nicole, Nicole's boyfriend, and her own boyfriend, a man named Dan. They visited a bar called the Butcher Boy. According to those present, the group was together for several hours, drinks were shared, conversation flowed. At some point, the group's attention dispersed. Dan and the others drifted to different corners of the bar, leaving Rebecca, at times, on her own. It was in one of those moments that a man approached her. According to Dan, he walked Rebecca to her front door at around 3:30 inches in the morning, waited until she stepped inside, and then left. Shortly after, Rebecca texted her mother to confirm she was home and safe. Dan was the last known person to see Rebecca alive, and that made him an immediate focus of the investigation. In homicide cases, the people closest to a victim, partners, friends, those who were present in the final hours, are always examined carefully. Not out of suspicion born of prejudice, but because statistics bear it out. Those who harm rarely arrive as strangers. Detectives brought Dan in and questioned him at length. He was cooperative. He maintained steadily that he had walked Rebecca to her door, waited until she was inside, and then left. He said he had no idea what could have happened to her, and he was visibly distressed at the thought that she had come to harm. At the detective's suggestion, he agreed to take a polygraph examination. The results indicated deception on the questions that mattered most, whether he knew where she was, whether he had any involvement in her disappearance. However, investigators were careful not to treat the polygraph as conclusive. Such tests are tools, not verdicts, and they are inadmissible in court for good reason. Their reliability is contested. When detectives searched Dan's home, they found nothing. When they cross-referenced his account against those of the other people present that night, everything matched. His story was consistent, corroborated, and unsupported by physical evidence of any wrongdoing. With nothing linking him to Rebecca's death, detectives had to look elsewhere. Dr. Koer was asked to estimate the time of death. Toxicology testing revealed no alcohol in her system at the time of death, a surprising finding given that she had been at a bar. The explanation: the body metabolizes alcohol only while alive. The absence of alcohol indicated she had survived long enough after leaving the bar for her system to process what she had consumed. Dr. Koer estimated she had died approximately 4 hours after last being seen, though he acknowledged this was an approximation. The breakthrough came from Rebecca's phone records. Her family reviewed the call log on her account and found 2 incoming calls in the early hours of the morning, both from a number with a 617 area code. The first came at 4:10 a.m. and lasted about 15 minutes. The second arrived at 4:27 a.m. and disconnected after roughly 20 seconds. Whoever had made those calls had almost certainly been the last person to speak with Rebecca before her death. Cell tower data provided additional context. Every call made on a mobile phone bounces through the nearest available tower. As a caller moves, the signal shifts from one tower to the next, and those transitions are logged by the service provider. By plotting the sequence of towers used during the 2 calls, investigators could trace the approximate path of the caller. The phone placing those calls had been moving in a west to east direction toward Rebecca's neighborhood. The brief second call, just 20 seconds long, combined with the timing and trajectory, led investigators to believe the caller had been announcing their arrival at her door. A quick call, an open gate. "Come out, I'm here." When detectives tried to reach that number, they got nothing. The line was unregistered, a prepaid burner phone, with no traceable owner. Meanwhile, Dr. Koer was working to determine exactly how Rebecca had died. One early question was whether she had been alive when the fire was set. The answer came from her lungs. They contained no soot. Had she been breathing during the fire, particulates would have been drawn into the airways. Their absence meant she was already dead when the flames were lit. Internal examination revealed the cause of death. There was a stab wound to the liver, surrounded by substantial hemorrhaging evidence she had been alive when it was inflicted. There were also 4 sharp force injuries to the neck. Veins in the neck, when cut while the heart is still beating, can draw air inward. That air travels to the heart, where it disrupts pumping and causes rapid death. X-rays confirm this. There was a visible air-blood interface in the heart, a telltale sign of air embolism. At least one of the neck wounds had occurred while Rebecca was still alive. The official cause of death was listed as multiple stab wounds to the liver and to the neck ruled a homicide. Surveillance footage from the butcher boy gave investigators their next lead. Reviewing the tapes from that night, they could see Rebecca sitting somewhat apart from her group. A man older, conservatively dressed, wearing a kind of sweater vest, approached her and inserted himself into her space. The two could be seen looking at their phones simultaneously, apparently exchanging contact information. One of the people who had been with Rebecca that night, a woman named Jennifer, was brought back in for a second interview. She now remembered the man clearly. He had made her deeply uneasy, pushing into conversations, asking intrusive questions. He had taken her phone and entered his name and number into her contacts. The name he had used was J. Brown, and the number he had given was a 617 number. It was the same 617 number that had called Rebecca in the final minutes of her life. Investigators pulled Jennifer's phone records and confirmed the match. J. Brown was now their primary suspect. But before they could pursue that lead further, the Connecticut Crime Lab delivered unexpected news. Fingerprints had been recovered from the duct tape used to wrap Rebecca's body. Lifting prints from the adhesive side of tape is technically demanding under any circumstances. The adhesive surface traps oils from the skin, but it also attracts contaminants that can obscure or destroy the ridge detail needed for a match. Doing so after a fire after exposure to heat and chemical suppressants borders on exceptional. The latent fingerprint examiner had recovered 2 thumbprints, one left and one right, from the inner surface of the duct tape binding Rebecca's body. Both prints were of sufficient quality to run through the state database. When the comparison came back, both matched a single individual, a man named Evans Ganthier. Ganthier had a criminal history, though nothing violent on record. What caught investigators' attention were the patterns in his background: allegations of controlling behavior toward a girlfriend, suspected involvement in exploiting women, and a reported habit of photographing women in his garage. When Jennifer was shown a photo array that included his image, she identified him immediately as the man who had taken her phone, the man who had called himself J. Brown. J. Brown was not a person, it was an alias. Evans, Ganthier, and J. Brown were the same man. Surveillance was established on an address in the Bronx where his girlfriend resided. His SUV was spotted parked nearby. Investigators maintained the watch for days, patient and methodical. The following morning, officers observed Ganthier emerge from the building, cross to his vehicle, and open the door. He was taken into custody without incident. He was brought in for questioning and, seemingly confident that nothing incriminating could be found, agreed to searches of both his car and his residence. At his home, the garage had been recently cleaned with unusual thoroughness. There were commercial-grade scrub brushes, bottles of cement cleaner, and a freshly painted section of floor. The smell of chemical cleaning agents still lingered. Something had been very deliberately erased. But the garage itself, despite its suspicious appearance, yielded no direct physical connection to Rebecca. The car was a different matter entirely. On the center console, and in the gap between the driver's seat and the console, technicians found blood. Dark stains that had dripped downward and pooled at the base of the seat. DNA analysis confirmed what the pattern already suggested. The blood was Rebecca Koster's. She had been in the front seat of Evans Ganthier's vehicle, and something violent had happened to her there. Confronted with this, Ganthier chose not to confess. Instead, he constructed a story. He claimed to have met Rebecca at the bar, exchanged numbers casually, and called her later in the night simply to extend the evening's socializing. She had directed him to her home. Once in the car together, he said, she began displaying signs of a medical episode, foaming at the mouth, unsteady on her feet. He said he brought her into his garage to try to help her, that she had tripped over a set of dumbbells and struck her head on the concrete floor. She bled heavily from the impact. He put her in the back of his SUV, intending to drive her to a hospital. On the way, he said, she stopped breathing. He panicked. What followed, he admitted, was a series of escalating and desperate decisions. He cut off her fingers and toes. He carved out the section of skin bearing her tattoo. He drove onto the Port Jefferson Ferry, crossed into Connecticut, and wandered until he found a stretch of road dark enough to stop. He pulled over, left her body at the roadside, poured gasoline over it, and set it alight. He insisted he had not killed her. He wanted people to understand that she had died of an accident, and he had simply made catastrophic decisions in the aftermath of that accident. Prosecutors and investigators found the account implausible from multiple angles. The most obvious problem was the blood in the front seat. If Rebecca had simply collapsed and hit her head in the garage, there was no reason for her blood to be pooling beside the driver's seat, a location consistent with an assault, not an accidental fall. Ganthier's account explicitly placed her in the back of the vehicle. How then had her blood ended up at the front? Dr. Kaner's autopsy findings undermined the story entirely. A blow to the head, even a severe one, would typically leave physical evidence: fractures, subdural hematoma, contusions. The examination of Rebecca's skull showed none of these. What the autopsy did show was stab wounds, 4 to the neck, 1 to the liver. The liver wound had produced substantial internal hemorrhaging consistent with an injury sustained while the heart was still pumping. The air embolism in the heart proved that at least 1 neck wound had also been inflicted while she was alive. None of this was consistent with someone who had fallen and hit their head. The trial lasted 4 weeks. Rebecca's mother sat through every session. She had attended the arraignment, where she learned for the first time the full and unsparing details of what had been done to her daughter in the hours after her death. She described that day as the worst of her life. Worse, she said, even than the moment she had been told Becky was gone. Hearing exactly what had been done transformed grief into something rawer and harder to name, but she came back every day. She sat in that courtroom and bore witness because she believed her daughter deserved someone there to represent her. Ganthier maintained his innocence throughout. Even from the stand, he cast himself as a bystander to a tragedy, a man who had made wrong choices in a moment of panic but had not taken a life. He expressed what sounded like remorse for his behavior after the fact, for failing to do the right thing. He did not acknowledge the stab wounds. He did not acknowledge the blood in his front seat. He did not acknowledge the fingerprints on the tape, or the excised tattoo, or the removed fingers. His performance was, by all accounts, convincing in the way that only a person entirely without conscience can be convincing. After 5.5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. The cause of death was homicide by stabbing, proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Evans Ganthier was sentenced to the maximum term, 25 years to life in prison. The judge, in delivering the sentence, made clear that the cruelty of what had been done, not just the killing, but what followed, placed this case in a category beyond ordinary violence. For the investigators and prosecutors involved, the verdict carried a particular weight. Homicide cases are always serious, but cases involving deliberate identity destruction carry an added dimension of injustice. The victim becomes twice erased, once in death and again in the attempt to reduce her to an unidentifiable object. Rebecca's body had been brought to Connecticut specifically to sever the connection between victim and perpetrator, between cause and consequence. Had she gone unidentified, had the dental match never been made, had those thumbprints not somehow survived the fire and the tape and the heat, She might have been buried without a name in a public cemetery. No trial, no accountability, no justice. The work of forensic pathology patient, unglamorous, technically demanding, had made this verdict possible. Dr. Koer and the crime lab technicians had reconstructed the truth from what a killer had tried to destroy. They had read the evidence in the bones and tissue and blood and tape, and they had given that evidence a voice in court. In doing so, they had spoken for someone who could no longer speak for herself. Rebecca's mother found no peace in forgiveness. She knew people might expect it of her, might find it admirable, and she acknowledged that she was simply not capable of it, not in this case, not for what had been done. What she found instead was something smaller but concrete, the certainty that Evans Ganthier would not walk free, would not approach another young woman in another bar, would not make another call from another untraceable phone. It was not healing, but it was justice, and in the absence of everything else, it was what she had.